Hello, my name is Andy and I am the Village Idiot. I'm armed with a car and a GoPro and an unhealthy amount of time on my hands. I'm using that time to attempt to visit every civil parish in England. You're watching the East Riding of Yorkshire series. Together with the unparished city of Hull, it forms the county of the same name. There's 172 parishes here. Which one are we in today? Hello folks, welcome back to the East Riding of Yorkshire once again. There's not many to go now, and there's only one left in the vicinity of Bridlington, apart from Bridlington itself, obviously. I'm beginning this episode outside of B&B, and there's plenty of those in this village. Welcome to Flamborough. Here's my disclaimer for people who may be watching me for the first time. I say things as I would in my native accent and dialect. As a result, I may not pronounce things in the same way as the locals do. Remember, I'm a visitor. It's impossible to know everything. Leave me a comment, spin me a like and bash that subscribe button. Let's get to today's parish video. Flamborough, Fleyne's fort. Now here's one I've been looking forward to, perhaps in some ways a lot more than any other in the East Riding. If you look at the map of the county and pay attention to the coastline, you'll notice that the northeastern corner is wildly different to the rest. Whilst most of the East Yorkshire coast suffers from coastal erosion, here it's a different story. The parish of Flamborough occupies the only headland in the county, which sticks out into the North Sea by as far as 6 miles at its furthest point. Flamborough's coastline is rough and rugged, defined mainly by huge chalk cliffs. Like the cliffs at Bempton, Flamboroughs provide nesting sites for many thousands of seabirds. Man-made features on the cliff top include 2 lighthouse towers, the older dating from 1669 and the newer from 1806. That's all on the coastline, but the village itself is an absolute treasure trove when it comes to features. Perhaps the one that stands out the most is the crumbling wall of Flamber Castle. The village has an ancient church, a monument, several pubs, loads of shops, and at this time of year, a few more residents than usual. Yes, this is definitely a touristy place, but I'm talking primarily about the flower pot people. Without a doubt, one of my favourite places anywhere in Yorkshire. Come with me to see what it's like. We start in the village itself on North Marine Road. Keep in mind as we walk around Flamborough that the main reason people come here is for the landmarks and attractions on the coastline around Flamborough Head. The village is a different animal. Whilst it does rely a lot on the tourism of Flamborough Head, this is a place which grew up primarily thanks to fishing. Many of the narrow terraced houses here would have been fishermen's homes. Almost every other house seems to have a marine-related name or a nameplate that features a fishing coble or some other kind of ship. There are pubs here, at least 4 in close proximity. First up we have the Rose and Crown. This one's popular with both residents and holidaymakers alike, and in the past it's been supportive of Flamborough's campaigns and causes, with a history of charity fundraising. It has a beamed ceiling throughout, which is adorned with horse brasses. It's located at the point where North End becomes the High Street, and this runs into a square marking the centre of Flamborough village. Quite a few of the residential buildings along here used to be businesses. Take 24A for example, which used to be an old sweet shop. There are still plenty of businesses here today, including 2 chip shops. This is Lighthouse Fisheries, and further up the road into the square is High Street Fisheries. Flamborough's reliance these days on tourism rather than the fishing industry means that in a general sense business is secure here. It may no longer be swarming with fishermen all heading to the sea every day aboard their cobles, but it's still a thriving village, providing for the needs of holidaymakers and day trippers who pass through it all to reach the attractions on Flamborough Head. And let's be honest, everybody loves fish and chips, don't they? Via a short footway called Victoria Row, we're on Chapel Street now. This is the Victoria Institute, originally built as a club and a reading room in 1887. It would have been mainly frequented by fishermen just over a century ago, but now it's a fully licensed private members club. This road gets its name thanks to a Methodist chapel, but there's a few other bits along here besides. Monument Garage is a good example. This is right next to a couple more food outlets, namely the Roma Kebab Takeaway and the Copperfields Cafe and Diner. You'll never go short of food in Flamborough. So in typical TVI fashion, I found all the foodie places first. What can I say? Probably think about my stomach more than anything else. But you know what? The fact that Flamborough has so many is a surefire way to know that you are at the seaside, because obviously this is a very touristy area and people need feeding. So it's good to know where all the food outlets are. Okay, next on our route, we have this junction here, and you're looking at something called the Monument. Let's check that out. More accurately, this is the Fishermans Monument. It commemorates the crews of two fishing cobles named Two Brothers and Gleaner, who perished in stormy seas in 1909. Both attempted to return to the safety of the North Landing. Two Brothers made it successfully, but Gleaner capsized. On seeing the plight of Gleaner, Two Brothers turned their boat around and attempted to rescue them, before they too were capsized. Both crews were lost close to the rocks, known as West Scar. There's a second memorial here too, this one for Carol, Sandra and North Wind, which were lost in 1984. A left turn now into Post Office Street, and as if by magic, this is the post office, occupying the junction with Tower Street. Now along here we find the remaining two pubs. This one's called the Ship Inn. Like the Rose and Crown, it has a mixed clientele and is often used for live music and small functions. It sits on the edge of Dog and Duck Square, where the last pub can be found. It's called the Royal Dog and Duck, and surprisingly, it's the newest of the boozers. Its interior dates back to the early 20th century, and its layout has remained largely unchanged since. The big blue building next door is Railway House, and it was the original premises of Flamborough's Co-op. That's now elsewhere, as we'll see shortly. We've now completed the journey around the village's central square, and we're back onto the high street, facing the other way, but not for long. Next up, it's Greenside, another short narrow street that runs between School Lane and South Sea Road. It emerges at the enormous village green, upon which there's a play area. This area is vastly residential, and you won't find many holidaymakers in these parts. It's all local people instead. This is South Sea Road, which runs almost parallel to Tower Street. If you follow this all the way to its conclusion, it ends up at the South Landing. More on that later, but for now, here's the Co-op, which is Flamborough's main shop. This stands on what was a small industrial area, with units that dealt with things like plumbing and joinery. Its car park occupies the site of a former funeral directors called Ward Brothers, a big difference to now. Just up the street is Rocket Cart House. This must have had a connection to the Coast Guard. Rocket cart houses were usually Coast Guard watchtowers. Now most of Flamborough's main landmarks are either to the north of the village or in the centre. There are some to the south, they're just a bit more sparse. Now one of them is in this big residential area. You can see over here we've got a library. That's the library there, the white building. And next to that, there's another building. That is Flamborough Village Hall. Let's talk about those two next. Opened in 1938, Flamborough Village Hall was built by the local people in memory of its sons who gave their lives in war. This has served the community well for over 80 years. It's managed by a Charitable Incorporated Organisation, or CIO for short. Next door is the library. This has the rather cute little nickname of the Little Library on the Cliff Tops, and it's not wrong to be honest. As with all East Riding libraries, it's part of the refill network. This means if you're a walker or a cyclist that carries a water bottle, you can refill it for free. Next we hit a sports ground. These are the Woodcock Memorial playing fields, and you can watch a game of cricket here. Founded in 1863, Flamborough Cricket Club have two teams, one in the Scarborough Beckett League and one in the Bridlington and District Evening League. Flamborough might be a big place, but there's not a great deal of really new property. Opposite the sports ground is Southsea Mews, one of the few modern cul-de-sacs that it has. Just beyond this, on the right, is a road called Lily Lane, and this will take us slightly uphill now towards St Oswald's Church. This one first appears in historical records in 1150 when it was granted to Bridlington Priory by William Fitznigel. The interior features a frame set upon the west wall called the Strickland Pardon, granted by Charles II in 1660 to Walter Strickland, absolving him of high treason, even though he supported Parliament during the Civil War. The Norman font is also notable, carved as it is with the design of interlaced diamonds. And in the chancel is a framed pair of gloves, a nod to a local custom where young maidens' funeral processions were led by a girl wearing a pair made of white paper. Now, it just so happens that I've happened to do Flamborough at the time when the Flower Pot Festival is on. Now, if you don't know what the Flower Pot Festival is all about, I can show you. On this bench here, I'm sat next to two, I could call them sculptures, I suppose. I don't know what they're supposed to be called. Two sculptures, let's just say sculptures, which are made from flower pots. And we've got a bride and groom. Here's the bride, completely made of flower pots. Absolutely fantastic, that, isn't it? So creative. And the groom, who's on this side, there we go, he's looking very dapper, isn't he? Look at that, awesome. I've seen some other good examples as I've been wandering around. In the window of the pharmacy, for example, there was Bart Simpson and Marge Simpson, which was quite cool. Outside the village hall, you may have even seen it yourself, there was a Dalek from Doctor Who there. So I wonder what else we're going to find Flower Pot Festival wise as we wander around the rest of Flamborough. These two are absolutely fantastic, can't get enough of them. It's a brilliant idea, isn't it? The churchyard wall is interesting. The bricks used to rebuild it in 1990 came from Flamborough's first national school, which the village gained in 1846. The stones at its base are from a former church tower, which fell down before 1800. Over the road is a small cemetery and the church hall, and on the same site as the church is a collection of chalk houses. These were all part of Church Farm, now converted into private dwellings. It didn't take long to come across another flower pot creation. On the next bend was none other than our current King Charles III, in all his finery. On the royal theme, our late Queen was also present in the flower pot form, overlooking a wall at Flamber Manor. The manor house, a classic Georgian small country house of pleasing proportion, has been in use as a bed and breakfast since 1987. It dates from the last quarter of the 18th century and it's a Grade 2 listed building. One of its outbuildings is used as a small antique shop, which also sells woolens and fabrics. The Manor of Flamborough was first recorded in the Domesday Book, and one has existed here ever since. That brings us neatly on to Flamber Castle. The title of Flamber Castle is a little misleading. The ruin seen before you here is actually that of the previous manor house, built by the powerful Constable family. They occupied Flamborough from around 1090 and lived in an original earth and timber fortress. In 1351, Edward III granted Marmaduke Constable a licence to crenellate their building, and it seems likely that the castle's construction began shortly afterwards. Now all that remains is one crumbling wall and a massive patch of earthworks. It's all best seen from the War Memorial Garden, which occupies part of the site. Beyond the castle remains, Tower Street becomes residential for a short way, with this block of flats providing some of the dwellings. The next landmark is the Seabirds Inn. This was until recently a pub, but now it's been converted into a bar and restaurant. It still serves alcohol, so I guess you could still term it a pub. It might not look much from the outside, but online reviews are fantastic, with a lot of visitors saying they found it by accident and were pleasantly surprised. If it's not for you though, the Royal Dog and Duck is literally just over the road again at this point, along with a very handy toilet block. We're now in the central part of the village again, this time at a small park opposite the Fishermans Monument. In here there's a ship's mast. Commissioned in the year 2000, this was placed here simply to commemorate the maritime history of Flamborough, not for anything in particular. Beside that was a gorgeously painted Atlantic sea puffin and a very colourful sculpture made of flower pots, ideal for the time of year. And rounding off the village centre is the Methodist Church, which opened in 1975, replacing an 1874 built primitive building known as the Bourne Chapel. The building next door on Carter Lane is Prospect House, built in 1901. It's next to Pearson Close, another new build cul-de-sac. A bit further up the road there's a forge, one that's still in operation. Formerly known as Garton Heritage Forge, it designs, constructs and manufactures just about anything made of metal, from tables and chairs to weather vanes, gates and railings, even signs and sculptures. It's great to see traditional master craftsmen still at work. I noticed a sign on a fence after that telling you about some bulbs planted by the children of Flamborough Primary School in 2005. So that must mean we are near the school, and as you can see, we are. That plaque is on a wall directly opposite Flamborough C of E Voluntary Controlled Primary School, which is this building right here. We haven't got much left now, and thank the Lord, because this is a big village. But even when we finish walking around Flamborough, there's still plenty more to cover. Now, as we know from earlier, Flamborough's first school was a national establishment built in the mid-1800s. That's not this building, this is much more recent. I have no date for its construction, but one would assume it was the late 1980s, given the date on the churchyard wall. It's the only school in the village today. From this point onwards, it becomes residential. The northwestern corner of Flamborough is all modern housing, dominating the road to Bempton and several side streets to the north and south. To finish, I cut down Beach Avenue, onto Woodcock Road and back to the start. Okay, we are all the way around the main walk around Flamborough village, but of course there are some other things to cover yet. If you say the word Flamborough to anyone, you know, local or even semi-local, the first thing they'll think of is a lighthouse, and we'll see that in a short while. But of course, Flamborough sits on a headland, and there's more than just a lighthouse on the coast. Our trip around the coastline of Flamborough Head begins at the North Landing, easily one of the most picturesque places in the country. Its natural beauty attracts tourists, as you might well expect, but that wasn't the case centuries ago. Because Flamborough village is a mile from sea and had no harbour, both the north and south landings were used to launch fishing cobles. This was a dangerous practice because they were small open boats exposed to sudden North Sea storms. Until marine engines were developed in the 20th century, drowning was commonplace at both landings. Some small-scale fishing does still take place in these waters. Indeed, the North Landing has a couple of fishing boats on its beach. In more recent times, the North Landing was used to launch lifeboats. So too was the South Landing, but now only the latter has a working lifeboat house. The North Landing's lifeboat was withdrawn in 1993, but the steep slipway still remains. The lifeboat station is now the Boathouse Burger and Grill, catering for the many tourists that this gets. And the North Landing has a little bit of film trivia. The beach was used as a filming location for the 2016 remake of Dad's Army. Now, as someone who's been coming to the East Coast for pretty much all his entire life on holiday and just to see bits and bobs that he hasn't seen before, it's fair to say the North Sea gets a little bit of a reputation for being quite dirty. But to be fair, here at the North Landing, it is anything but. You can see how clear and how blue that water is. It's absolutely fantastic. I've never been here before, and I'm just wondering why I haven't, to be honest with you. It's absolutely awesome. Now, I've got the arduous task now of getting back up this slope, past the Boathouse Burger and Grill, which you can see there, and up to the visitor centre and all the other gubbins that's at the top of the hill. It's quite steep coming down, it's going to be equally steep going back up. Atop the cliffs, the North Landing has more facilities. You're looking here at the Caravel Bar, absolutely teeming with people, as you'd expect on a pretty hot summer's day. Behind it, there's a caravan park. Flamborough has plenty of them. They're scattered all across the headland. The biggest is at Thornwick Bay. And with so many tourists around, it stands to reason there's a pub up here. This is the North Star, which has been trading as a hostelry here since 1840. It's run by the Johnston family, who have continued its traditions and will soon celebrate their 30th anniversary of ownership. Just up the coast from the North Landing is Thornwick Bay, a rock beach surrounded by cliffs. West of the bay is Thornwick Nab, a mini headland that's not big enough to be defined in the same way as Flamborough Head. Thornwick Bay is essentially a scaled-down version of the North Landing, with fewer facilities and usually less tourists. I opted not to drive to it, but it's easy enough to get to. You just have to follow the lane down the side of the Viking Hotel. Should you venture to it, you'll find a plaque that commemorates the loss of Robert Redhead, a lifeboat bowman who died in 1952 whilst attempting to rescue 2 girls from drowning. Now we're on Lighthouse Road, and this is the part of Flamborough Head that literally everybody seems to know. Flamborough has not just one, but 2 lighthouses, one very old, the other much newer. On your screens now to the left is the old lighthouse. It was built in between 1669 and 1674 by Sir John Clayton. It may not look very important now, but it's Grade 2 listed, and for a good reason. It's the oldest surviving complete lighthouse in England. Oddly though, it was never lit. It was designed to display a fire on top, but Clayton was unable to raise enough funds to provide the fuel. So, as a result, the bright white chalk tower was only ever used as a day mark by passing ships. It was next to useless at night. The tower is now managed by a group called the Friends of the Chalk Tower, and it's occasionally open to the public. It has 98 steps to the top of the tower. The headland was finally lit when the current Flamborough Lighthouse came into operation in December 1806. To get to that, all we have to do is to follow the road to the end. The light was designed by Samuel Wyatt and cost £8,000 to build. When first lit, it had a distinctive light characteristic, 2 white flashes followed by a red flash. That was designed by optics specialist George Robinson. The red light was used to distinguish Flamborough from another lighthouse at Cromer in Norfolk. Today, the light, which was converted from oil to electricity in 1940, is now fully automated and displays 4 white flashes every 15 seconds. Flamborough Head also has a fog signal station at the cliff edge, built in 1859. It was replaced by a siren in 1908. In 1975, it reverted back to a signal. Powered by electricity, it sounds one long blast every 90 seconds. Lighthouse Road is a clear way, so getting out to film these was impossible. I also made extra sure not to stop the car at any point in order to comply with the highway code. The area around the lighthouse is a tourist destination, hence why there's a restaurant here. This part of Flamborough Head often attracts many migrant birds in the autumn and is a key point for the observation of passing seabirds. When the wind is in the east, many birdwatchers position themselves below the lighthouse to catch them. In late autumn, many comb the hedges and valleys for landbird migrants. Now let's head for the South Landing, and it's quite a contrast to all of this. You can't drive all the way down to the South Landing. You can only get part of the way before the road becomes private. There's a few reasons why, but the main one is because of the South Landing's lifeboat house, active as we learned earlier. The boathouse is constructed on the site of an older building, upgraded to accommodate the new at the time Atlantic 21 class and TWH tractor coupled in line. So instead you have to walk to the beach, but it isn't far. You have to park at the Living Sea Centre, Flamborough's marine education hub, which aims to inspire and enthuse people about the wonderful sea and bird life found off the Yorkshire coast. This often has a lot of school visits, and its proximity to the South Landing means that children don't have to go far to experience it all firsthand. And of course, we can too. So after parking the car and paying the reasonable sum of £1.40, I strolled down to the beach to see what was appertaining. Now, as I understand it, the South Landing is a lot less popular than its northern counterpart. And to be fair, we've already seen a bit of evidence of that, haven't we? Because the car park there had virtually no vehicles in it at all. There was only a handful. And the North Landing was snided, wasn't it? So let's see what the South Landing's like. I'm walking down the road from the Living Sea Centre, which will take me towards the South Landing beach. I imagine this is a lot more peaceful than the North Landing. We'll soon find out, won't we? I've opted to omit music from this section purely because of the sound of the sea. It's so soothing and calm. Have a listen. It's possible, but probably not advisable without guidance, to walk around Flamborough Head to the lighthouse and the Sea Watch Observatory via the cliff top. If you do so, you'll pass the Flamborough Sea Arch, affectionately known as the Drinking Dinosaur. Here's a picture of the feature in question. As I suspected, the South Landing is a lot quieter than the North. The beach is rocky, not sandy, and both it and the cliffs are a brilliant shining white. By far and away, this is one of the most wonderful places we have in the UK. The towering chalk cliffs are, and will always be, the oldest feature of this part of the East Riding's landscape. Together with their caves, the small sandy or rocky inlets, and the millions of seabirds that nest in them in the spring and summer, they've attracted thousands of visitors since tourism began, and they remain a prime attraction today. Do you know what, people? I think I may have found a favourite spot here in Flamborough. There was nothing wrong with the North Landing, nothing wrong with where the lighthouses are in Flamborough Head either, but it's the South Landing for me, and the reason for that is simply because it's nowhere near as busy. It's absolutely fantastic. All you can hear really, apart from me talking, is the sound of the sea. Soothing, calm waves. Isn't it just amazing? You know, a lot of people decide at this time of year to go on holiday to the likes of Spain and France and Italy and Greece and, you know, warmer climes. But they don't need to really, especially not if they like this kind of stuff. If the weather stays nice, just bring yourself to Flamborough Head, or to the South Landing beach, or to the North Landing, or to Thornwick Bay, or anywhere on the East Yorkshire coast really, and you get this. Absolutely brilliant. Now, we've come through this entire video and we haven't yet mentioned Dyke, but that was by design. The parish we've just visited is theoretically an island. You just wouldn't know it by looking at the map. It's not an island in the traditional sense either. Let me explain. Dyke is a spectacular 2.5 mile ravine that separates the outward 5 square miles of the headland, an area including the village, from the rest of England. It's a massive ancient earthwork shrouded in mystery. The southern half was formed by nature, but the rest up to the cliffs in the north was dug by men who threw excavated earth on the Flamborough side for a high defensive bank to protect against attacks from the west. One theory is that the artificial half was dug by the Anglo invader Ida, who landed his army here from a fleet of ships in 547 AD. When the Vikings came between the 8th and 10th centuries, they would also use it for defence, and maybe did more work on it, hence the name Dyke. However, nobody really knows the true history of it. What's for sure, more has happened here than we will ever know. Folks, I knew this was going to be a long video with lots and lots to talk about, but I wasn't anticipating that much. Flamborough is a really big place and loaded with things of interest. From sea tragedies to ancient ruins and lighthouses which were never lit, it's well worth exploring. What a fabulous part of East Yorkshire. Thanks for watching this video, folks. Don't forget to like this episode if you haven't already. It really makes a difference with YouTube. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and give us a share too if you've got friends who'd like it. You can find all the links to my social media accounts below, as well as my Buy Me a Coffee page where you can donate to the channel. Also, if you've enjoyed this episode, have a look at some more videos in this series. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as the Village Idiot, and I'm out.